Hi, it's me again. You probably already knew that. Now that we have talked about internal and external validity, we know that internal validity refers to how well the study lets us know how well the study eliminates alternative explanations. And external validity tells us how much the study generalizes to the real world, and we know they have a reciprocal relationship. When internal validity is high, external validity is typically low. And when external validity is high, internal validity is typically low. So now we're going to talk about a body of research designs that has high external validity. So at this point, because I said it has high external validity, you should know that it has low internal validity. And this type of research design, as I said before, actually a body, and it can be called correlational relationships or non-experimental. So these are not experiments. So what are the cornerstones of correlational research? How do you know that a study is correlational? And you'll want to figure this out because 99.9% chance it'll be on the test. The first thing is that the researcher does not manipulate variables. The researcher observes the variables in the real world. So, for example, the example I gave earlier about flossing and heart disease, the researcher didn't tell people to floss or not, or give them special floss, and the researcher certainly didn't give people heart disease. He looked or she looked at how those variables related in the real world. So one of the easy ways that you can tell that a study is correlational, ask yourself, did the researcher manipulate any variables? If not, if she just looked at them in the real world, it's correlational research. Correlational research quantifies the strength and direction of the relationship between two or more variables. So what that means is correlational research tells us if two things are related. And when we talk about statistics, we're going to talk a lot more about these relationships. But all you need to know now is they tell us that these two things are related in the real world. Flossing is related to heart disease. Now, correlations can be used for prediction. And in fact, if you remember that when I defined the independent variable and the dependent variable, and I said that independent variable and dependent variable were terms that we only used in experimental research. I hope you remember that. You're nodding your head vigorously now, I'm sure. In correlational research, we use predictor and criterion. Predictor and the criterion. And the reason is, which I'm going to talk about more in a minute, is that we don't know the direction. We don't know which variable causes which from correlational research. We have to do an experiment to figure that out. So we don't know which variable depends on the other in correlational research. We need to do an experiment to figure that out. So because of that, we use the words predictor and criterion because they're a little more interchangeable. They don't imply that there's a direction, that one variable causes the other. Although in real life, people often make a mistake and they think that correlational research tells us about causality. It tells us if one variable causes another, but they're wrong. They never took research methods. So in that manner, I want you to take a deep breath, and wherever you are, if you're in the library, if you're at work, if you're at home, if you've got your earphones on, whatever you're doing, listening to me, I want you to say out loud with me, correlations do not establish causation. One more time, correlations do not establish causation. And if you actually said that out loud and you did that, I am very, very proud of you. So what else do we need to know about correlational research? Well, I'm going to give you an example. Let's say I'm doing my own little study and I want to look at the relationship between class attendance and grades. And let's say I find that these two variables are correlationally related. I look at all of my records from all of the years that I've taught research methods, and I see that the more the students attended class, the better their grades were. That's kind of cool. So I do a correlational study. I just look out in the real world, what happened. I'm not manipulating. I'm not making students come to class, and I'm not giving them better grades because I see their faces every day, even though I wish I could do that. But let's say there is class attendance. We find a positive relationship between class attendance and grades. As class attendance goes up, grades goes up. So I would naturally assume that class attendance causes good grades. We would hope that there would be a relationship that direction. Class attendance causes that way. But wait, we just said that correlation correlation is not causation. How many times can I say that? We just said that correlation is not causation, so there's a possibility that grades could cause attendance. And it's a bit of a stretch, but when we're working with variables that are more complex than grades and class attendance, this direction of causality could be possible. It could be that students who get good grades like class more, and they're more likely to come to class. Seriously, could happen. I know classes that I've gotten bad grades, and I hate to go to because, so that could run that way. Or, and I think this is probably closer to the truth, they're both caused by a third variable. And that could be conscientiousness. Students who are more conscientious attend class, and students who are more conscientious get better grades. So that's called a third variable. So correlational research tells us that they're related, but it doesn't tell us which direction they're related, which causes which, and that doesn't tell us if there's a third variable in the equation. And there are statistical ways to tease all this out, because in the real world, I probably think it's a little bit of everything. But correlational research, with a correlational study alone, we cannot answer that question. Here's another one, and I swear this is true in the real world. Correlational research, it's true that if you look at sales records of ice cream sales actually are positively correlated to drownings. Does that mean that ice cream sales cause drownings? Could be that people eat a lot of ice cream and then they forget to wait 30 minutes before they go in the water and they drown. Possible, but not really likely. Could it be that drownings cause ice cream sales? People's friends could be drowning and then they get all depressed and they eat a lot of ice cream? Possibly, but more likely it's a third variable, is hot weather. Hot weather is related to ice cream sales and hot weather is related to drownings. So it appears to the casual researcher that ice cream sales and drownings are related to each other. And in fact, they are. But it could be a third, I'm going to go back because I don't want to do this over again. It could be a third variable, and that's drownings. That's hot weather. So this is kind of a silly example, but it's really important when we're looking at things in the real world that we're trying to figure out the causal relationships, and they're not this simple. And people will often make mistakes, and they'll say that one thing causes another, that ice cream sales cause drowning, when that's not true. It's actually caused by, the relationship between the two is actually caused by a third variable. So that's something that you should be aware of when you think about evaluating research. If people only show a correlation, they do a non-experimental study, and in a bit we're going to talk about the statistics involved in a correlational study, so it'll be easy for you to identify. But you don't believe that. They don't understand research, and they don't understand that correlation is not causation. So I'm going to give you an example, and it's another oldie but a goodie, but I keep this study because I like the pictures of pandas. So this is a study about the behavioral and developmental consequences of early rearing experience for captive giant pandas. I mean, who wouldn't like giant pandas? So this study started with talking about the literature on socialization in pandas. And because they're mammals, we know that pandas learn from the attachment and relationship from their mothers. And pandas also learn from other pandas. So this study, the hypothesis of this study was that early social interactions between giant panda mothers and their cubs will contribute significantly to species-appropriate behavioral development of young pandas. So basically, let's break that up and make it simple. Pandas that were raised by their mothers will show more species-appropriate behavior than pandas who were not raised by their mothers. So our hypothesis is testable. We can prove it true or false, and it makes a prediction. We predict that pandas raised by their mothers will show more panda-like behavior than pandas not raised by their mothers. And we're going to test it this way. And they tested it at a panda raising facility somewhere in the United States. And their sample was a small one because it's hard to get panda cubs. They're an endangered species. They had 2 male singletons, mother raised, and singleton means just one baby at a time. They had 2 male singletons raised by their mother. They had 2 sets of twins, a male-female set of twin and a male-male set of twins who were raised by their mother. These are not all the same mother. They're, mother-baby pairs. And then 1 set of male twins raised alone. 1 set of male twins raised alone. So the procedure, how are we going to test this? Well, what these researchers decided to do is they observed the pandas. They can't really give the pandas a questionnaire. Where did you learn this from? Because pandas are not very good with pencils. So what they had to do is they had to observe panda behavior and record it. But as you might think, and as we're going to learn more about in this class, if we're going to record behaviors by observation, we need to stick to a strict recording scheme because you know that different people see different things. All you have to do is watch a courtroom show, CSU, whatever they are, special victims, SVU, whatever they are. All you have to do is watch a courtroom show to know that different people have different memories of the same thing. So in order to make sure that we're measuring behaviors consistently, researchers or their assistants who measure behaviors have very, very clear descriptions of that behavior. So that way they can know they're measuring behavior and not an inference of that behavior. They don't want to make inferences. They want to measure exactly what they're seeing because that's scientific and that can be replicated. So here's what they looked for. 3 of the behaviors, just right here, they looked for more, but this is all we're going to talk about. When pandas were in prolonged contact with each other, where they were wrestling, pushing, pulling, biting, or paw swatting each other without injury and without vocalizing, usually, that's what researchers recorded as a reciprocal play fight. And they measured, when they were recording the pandas, they recorded them for a specific length of observation, let's say an hour, and they noted how much of the time, on their watch, they looked at the minute hand, how much of the time pandas were engaging in reciprocal play fight behaviors. And that's a species typical behavior. They also measured bamboo manipulation. And that's, if you've ever seen a panda at the zoo, what they do. They grasp and rotate bamboo with paws, include sniffing and mouthing. They counted the time that pandas were doing that behavior, bamboo manipulation. And they also counted the time that pandas did self-motion play. And that's what they called rolling on their back, waving their limbs, doing little baby panda somersaults, handstands, rotating around an object, and body motion while hanging above the ground. The panda doesn't travel from one point to another. The self-motion play is in one spot. So those are three species typical behavior that are very well designed. And so researchers could agree when they recorded the amount of time that pandas engaged in these behaviors. So here's the results. And I'm just going to show you the one for manipulating bamboo because the study gets a little more complicated. But you can see this axis right here is time. And let's say it's minutes. Looks like they coded it a little more complicated. But we can see that the pandas reared by their mothers engaged in a range from 6 to 9 minutes in bamboo play during an observation period, while the pandas not raised by their mothers engaged in around 2 minutes per observation period. So, even without doing any stats, we can see that the mother-reared pandas spend a lot more time doing species-appropriate behavior. So this actually contains a little stats, but we'll talk about that later. So was our hypothesis supported? Yes, the stats showed that it was. Pandas reared by their mothers are much more likely to engage in species-appropriate behavior than pandas not reared by their mothers. Okay, now you don't have to shout this out. I think I've embarrassed you enough for one lecture. Tell me whether this study was experimental or correlational. Experimental or non-experimental. You're right, it was non-experimental. It was correlational. If you said either one of those words, you are on the right track. It was correlational. Now, if you're not sure, you might step back a little bit and identify the variables. So we had 2 variables in this study, and I'll give you a hint. Let's look back at the relationship. We basically said that pandas who were raised by their mothers will be more likely to do species-appropriate behavior. Pandas raised by their mothers are more likely to do species-appropriate behavior. Well, I hope that you picked out that the 2 variables were being raised by their mother or not, and species-appropriate behavior. Those are the variables, being raised by their mothers or not, species-appropriate behavior. So now you know what the variables are. Tell me, why is this a correlational study? And I'll walk you through it. So we've got the 2 variables, whether the pandas were raised by their mothers or not, and whether the pandas engaged in species-appropriate behaviors. And ask yourself, did the researchers manipulate whether the panda was raised by their mother or not? No. That would be unethical to take a baby panda away from its mother. No, they didn't manipulate that. That was pre-existing in the real world. They found the pandas that were, they actually didn't find them. They were in the panda training facility already, but they were already raised by their mother or alone. So that variable was not manipulated. How about species typical behavior? Did the researchers manipulate that? Again, a resounding no. They didn't give the baby pandas bamboo and make them play with it. They let that naturally happen. So researchers did not manipulate either of the variables. So we can conclude that this was a correlational study. Because remember, the first hallmark of a correlational study is that the researchers do not manipulate variables. They simply observe them and measure them in the real world. Now we'll take it a little bit further. From this study, we would like to conclude that in the wild, all pandas in the wild are more likely to do species-appropriate behavior, to do panda-like things, if they were raised by their mothers. We would like to generalize our findings to all of the pandas in the whole entire world. Why might we not be able to do that? Well, the first thing I could think of is these were pandas in captivity. Pandas in captivity might act very differently than pandas in the wild. So first there's that sample. We have a sample of pandas in captivity, and they may or may not be like pandas in the wild. The second thing I can think of is that if you remember, if we go back to those participants, we had a lot of girl babies. So especially all of the ones who were not raised by their mother were boy baby pandas. So we might have a confound there between the sex of the panda, male or female, and the ability or the learning of species-appropriate behavior. So because it wasn't an experiment, we can see and we can make a lot of generalizations of this, but we can't really say why. So this has relatively high external validity, but low internal validity. We really don't know why that relationship, we found that relationship. We know it exists, but we don't know why. And we don't know the direction of the relationship between the mother and species typical behavior. We can guess that the mother teaches them, but we don't know for sure. It could be that they feel safer when they're with the mother. There's a lot of reasons. So this is just a correlational study. We know there's a relationship, but we don't know the direction of causality. I think I've said that enough times. Okay, let's try one more time. I know this is getting long. Actually, no. Let's stop now and then we'll come back later.